Hey everyone. Sorry it's been a while between videos. Been trying to figure out exactly how I want to start explaining a few other things. So what I want to look at today is a concept that goes through everything that we do. And it's the concept of being energized. So I was asked one time, what is energized? And this is the word that I use a lot when I'm explaining things. So if you energize, this will happen. If you energize, you'll get good results. If you're having this problem, then just energize and it solves it. And then I was asked what that actually meant. And I was like, oh, okay, so for all the months that I've been saying it, you didn't actually know what I was saying. So, I'm going to try to hopefully explain that a little bit more. Now, so when I say being energized, that means every part of your body is activated and engaged and involved into a task, into an action. So that's physically, but also mentally and emotionally. You're fully engaged, fully involved. So that's all well and good, but how do we do it? How do we get there? So this is a never-ending process. You're always going to find little bits here that's, oh, this can improve, this can improve. So, but how do we do it? And basically it's through listening to yourself. So as I'm doing something, I start to say, okay, well, is there any part of me that I feel like, oh, maybe it's a little bit sluggish, or maybe it's just not fully engaged, or maybe it's even just switched off. You know, so for example, you know, I can throw a punch. Like, yeah, that's a great punch. It's a terrible punch, you know. So I go, okay, well, nothing really was engaged except maybe a little bit of muscle to make that movement happening. So, okay, well, what if I make a quicker movement like that? It's like, yeah, well, that was a little bit better. Okay, but pretty much only half of it was engaged. Okay, but look, okay, well, how does this other half have to work? So if I do another movement like that, okay, both sides. But okay, well, what were my legs doing? You know, should they be more involved? Should they be activated a bit more? Where was my focus? Actually, I was a little bit focused like this way. So I really need to be focusing more on what I'm actually doing in that moment. So, and this is just me rattling off what I just quickly noticed there. So as you start to progress with these things, you start to pick up more. It's like, oh, okay, this little bit here. I felt like just right here, I kind of switched off from my core. So if I activate that a bit more, or I felt like my focus kind of shifted for a moment, and things like that. So those little things. And this is important as well. In one of my other videos, I talked about the difference between multiple attackers and one-on-one sparring. And one of the things I mentioned in there is the flat-footedness of the sparring dynamic. And you see that quite a bit. Now, so I know that if I'm stepping like flat-footed, that part of me is not really energized. You know, it's not really doing anything. It's a little bit heavy when it lands, that sort of thing. A little bit slow. It's not doing a lot there. So those sorts of things are indicators. Like, so if I find myself in that sparring dynamics, I go, how did I get there? And I know that mentally as well, I'm also not fully engaged. It could be, so how do I fall into that? Okay, well, someone is, I don't know, saying things to me, and I'm just like, oh, okay, oops, you know, right, I'm gonna shape up. And really, what I've done there is I'm just falling into that dynamic. How do I let that happen? You know, mentally, I'm focused on just one thing, whereas I should be looking around and taking more control of the situation. So then I have to ask the question, well, how do I do that? I know what result I'm after. I know what it feels like to be mentally engaged and physically engaged. So I need to start developing a system and a process to make sure that I don't slip into that dynamic. Even if, because we say in survival, you know, in sparring, people agree to fight, but in survival, at least one person doesn't agree. So, but, you know, how does that look? So if someone's saying, you know, we'd like to fight, or they're being quite aggressive, and I say, oh, no, I don't want to fight, I'm slipping into the sparring dynamic right there, because I am trying to not fight on his terms. He's saying what he wants and I'm responding to that, rather than me creating my own dynamic outside of his, so that I can be fully mobile, fully free, rather than locked on to having to answer this person's questions, if that makes sense. That's another way of looking at it. So some of the best ways to train energizing yourself more is usually when you're tired or you're getting tired in an exercise. So as I'm training something, starting to get a bit weary, and suddenly I just start to relax, and my form isn't as good. My mind starts to wander a little bit, and I just want the exercise to be over. So all of those things right there is where I actually need to be going, no, I need to keep myself energized, not let part one part relax, not wish for this to end, not lose my focus. So, but it's often, this is where people struggle. And the reason people struggle is because of the mental anguish that goes through having to push through this thing. I liken it to being woken up from a really deep, peaceful sleep. So you're in a really deep, peaceful sleep, and all of a sudden someone's shaking you, waking you up, making you have to get out of bed and run and do things, and you're like, I want to be back in bed, I want to be in my little comfort zone, back in the womb, whatever it is, and can I do it later? I don't, and that feeling you get in the stomach where you have to I got to rip myself out of the bed, all of that kind of like discomfort is basically having to wake up, and it's the same thing. So when I'm doing an exercise and I'm a bit tired, it's like, no, these parts of the body have to wake up, they have to energize, they have to do things, they want to go back to sleep. It's like, no, mentally it's like, I just want this to end. It's like, no, you're focusing on the future. Like, you need to focus on what you're doing like right now, and keep that focus. If you're pulling a strained face when you're doing it, like, it's like you're focusing on the struggle. You're not focusing on the task. You need to be all of those things. But all of these things that I say, that's all like the whole having to wake up from a deep, peaceful sleep. You want that comfort. You want that nice little bit of, bit of safety there, where I can just relax just for a little bit as I get to the end. It's like, no, you have to be fully engaged. You have to be doing all of these things. So that feeling of waking up is, and you know what it's like when you are having to wake up. It's like, I'll do it tomorrow. This is uncomfortable. I don't want to do this. And your mind will come up with any kind of excuse to see that this whole process you have to push through can be delayed, or it's like, is it really that important? You'll come up with the excuses. It'll just happen. Now, this is a process that I go through daily. You can't avoid it. If you're pushing your limits, if you're exploring your boundaries, you're always going to be at that point where some part of you has to wake up that little bit more. But it's not even just that. It could just be when you're starting your training. You have just woken up, or you finished a long day at work. Your mind is somewhere else. You've been staring at your phone and you're zombified. You have to do that waking up process all over again. So there's that saying, you have to push through the suffering. That's not to say that you have to deliberately suffer. It's just saying that when you're at that kind of sleepy state, or some party's at that sleepy state, it's going to feel like suffering until you get to the other side. And yet, at the other side, the suffering pretty much gets ignored. Well, it doesn't get ignored. It's kind of like trying to push water away. When you push water away, it's going to come back. So when I'm feeling myself, I'm fully charged, I'm fully energized, you're at that stage where you can start to feel that coming back in, those little excuses or that little bit of energy dropping. But because you're on that other side, you're more aware of it, and you can just lift that energy back up and ignore that and push that water away again, rather than have to heave it away, and you just tap it away, if that makes sense. So it's a constant thing. It's not something that can be avoided. It's actually a good indicator of where you're at in that moment, and that you actually are pushing a boundary, you are doing a waking up, you actually are energizing yourself more. So consider that. I'm not saying push yourself to breaking point. I don't want you to injure yourself, I don't want you to hurt yourself. Like I said, don't deliberately suffer, but find where you're making those excuses, where your brain's doing that. That's your indicator right there, where you can go, okay, this is where I need to wake up. Okay, it's that discomfort zone, and I have to push through that. So If I don't feel that, then I often feel like, oh, I don't think I really pushed myself that hard. Maybe I worked hard, but maybe I didn't explore the boundaries, if that makes sense. So that's energizing in a nutshell. I hope that's helpful. Please leave comments, questions, whatever, if you like, down the bottom. And yeah, if you do, I'll try to get back to you. All right, happy training.